In the first episode of this conversation with Corinne about her life with bees, you will have heard about what it's like to open a beehive, the differences in behaviour between different bee colonies, piping of queen bees, and you were left with a cliffhanger of when a telephone call came and I was visiting Corinne and she was asked to go and deal with a swarm of bees and invited me to be her assistant. That's where this episode begins.
So I guess what I want to ask is if you could just talk us through what you have to do in that situation with the humans and with the bees.
The humans, I suppose, I just ignore them. Other than kind of like say, everything's going to be fine.
Yes.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing, don't worry.
Yes.
So you go and stand over on that side of the garden. And I think they all stood there and watched, didn't they?
They did,
yeah.
Yes.
And I can't remember, did we have a step ladder? We probably had it was up an apple tree, wasn't it?
I think
there was a tree in that back garden.
Yeah.
And basically what I'm looking for as the beekeeper, I'm looking for the queen, because wherever the queen goes,
Yes.
the bees will follow.
Yes.
And it's a swarm, and swarms happen when an older queen decides that she's going to move on to somewhere else, and the colony splits. When the queen flies, there's a whole load of bees at a certain period in their life cycle that will fly with her. So I'm trying to find the queen, and basically a technique that can be used is basically if you go up the ladder with a bucket in your hand, you give whatever branch or object the bees are clinging to, assuming that you can do this, a jolly good belt.
Mm-hmm.
And the bees will drop into the bucket en masse.
Wow.
The majority of the bees. So you've got the majority of the bees in the bucket. You then climb down, and your assistant, you,
Yes.
would have laid out a nice white sheet, usually.
Yes, I remember.
And you turn the bucket upside down.
Yes.
On the middle of the sheet, and you prop up with a stone that you probably, or a piece of wood that you found in the garden or wherever you happen to be doing this, you prop up so there's a little tiny entrance
Mm-hmm.
at the bottom of the rim of the bucket, but which is now upside down.
Yes.
And what you will find is that the bees that are remaining up the tree or wherever they happen to be will start looking for the smell of the queen, because the queen's no longer there, and it's the queen that keeps the colony together by her smell. So they will start scenting where has she gone, and they will fly towards where she is. So if you've got the queen in the bucket, that's where the bees will go.
Yes.
And you drive home with your bee suit on. Just in case there's any little escapee bees. And of course, as most beekeepers have got a spare hive.
Right.
I kept a spare hive exactly for these occasions. You open that hive up, and this is just amazing when this happens, is you put a little ramp up to the door of the hive, but eventually what will happen is all the bees will start roaming up towards the hive, and so they will just invite themselves home into another hive.
In a new encampment.
Yes, a new encampment. It's a lovely way of saying it, yeah.
And
you can literally see them yomping up. It takes a few minutes, sort of maybe 10, 15 minutes, but you will see them en masse just sort of wandering up this little ramp. And the early bees will arrive. They will stick their bottoms in the air.
Yeah.
And they will fan their wings, and what they're doing is saying, this is a cool spot, I can smell honey, this is home, come this way. Another way of doing it is to open up the top of the colony and giving the bucket a jolly good thump on the bottom of it, which of course is the top, and then they just drop into there.
He always sounds kind of gentler.
I like the gentle approach. I never used to use smoke. I thought, would I want that happening?
Mm-hmm.
People blowing smoke in my house? No, probably not.
Yeah.
So if I could not use smoke, I wouldn't use smoke.
Yeah.
So and gentle colonies I don't think they need smoke.
Uh-huh.
They
so
will
there
come
are
up.
circumstances that you might need to use the smoke.
Yeah, if the bees are getting upset or aggressive with you, then potentially it's a good idea to use smoke.
So it would be a bit strange to talk about bees without having a bit of chat
about honey, and I seem to remember that I have had a pot of honey from your bees. We must be going back a few years. How much has honey been a part of your journey with the bees?
When it comes to stealing honey, and there's different, I suppose even before we're talking about thieving the honey, we have to talk about different people's responses and ideas about how much honey to take.
Yes. The ethics of that, much as anything.
Yeah. And I was firmly of the belief and that I wasn't going to take too much. And by that, I mean you have to kind of like calculate and sort of hedge how cold is the winter going to be.
And a little bit about the process. So I guess the comb has kind of formed inside the hive. The bees have been busy doing their thing. What's the journey then for it to end up in a jar and you give it to me for my birthday?
So I guess I have to start with the different areas within a hive. So you've got what they call a brood box, and that's where the brood develops. And so you've got this honeycomb, which we're quite familiar when we've got comb honey, all these little cells. So you have to start with kind of like how the brood box basically houses the queen and the worker bees and the attendants to the queen. And she will roam around laying eggs in the cells in that space, in the centre of the brood box. And then around that you will have pollen, and then around that again you've got honey. And then on top of that brood box you have what they call supers, and they're smaller boxes. And those supers again have frames in, and the bees extend up into the supers. They build the cells and then they put honey in those, and those, it's from the supers that you steal.
Okay.
And you take the frames out, you put it in a honey extractor, which is essentially a centrifugal force. Right. And you spin it really quick and the honey flies out and sticks against the side. And you're left in theory with empty comb, which you can then put back in the hive and the bees refill it.
So, I really like the way that when you're talking about this, you stay true to this sense that you are stealing the honey. It's like you're owning the complicated part of that, and for me that's something really real. You're not kind of trying to claim that this relationship is one of harmonious equality in some way. It's somehow that you are taking more than you're giving. I think that's something that's really come across to me, because it's something I feel strongly with the trees as well, which are kind of, in the background all the time for me in this project. That the trees and the bees are giving us so much, and our job is to respect that and be responsible custodians. It's almost like they don't need anything from us. They'd be quite happily doing their thing without us.
They'd be happier. And the least we can do is, and sometimes the most we can do is not harm them, and live side by side better with them. I think someone said to me that a bee colony is a female socialistic society.
Wow.
Because it's dominated by the workers and they're all female.
Yes.
The queen is at the mercy of what the workers decide to do with her.
Right.
I think that should be transposed into our society myself.
Do you know what? This has been an absolute pleasure and a delight for me, because thinking back to that time when you took me as your assistant and I marched behind you in my bee suit, feeling quite important, down that road where that swarm had arrived, and it's almost like revisiting that memory has been fun, but catching up with you and just learning about this whole bee part of your life, I feel like I've just had a window and I've got to know you better, and I've loved it.
Oh, gee.
Thanks, Corinne.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
You're welcome.